All right, welcome to another deep dive. We got a really interesting one today, and one that you guys specifically requested.
Yeah, tons of requests for this one.
So many requests for this one, and let's just say it's a little, it's a little out there.
It's a little out there.
Yeah, we are diving into flat Earth theory.
Dun 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 dun
I
dun.
know.
Sounds crazy, right?
In the 21st century, it seems crazy, but it is a thing. People still believe this, and it's kind of gaining traction. So I think it's definitely worth exploring. Like, why is this still around?
Yeah, it's fascinating, right?
Yeah, you guys sent over a ton of stuff, articles, research papers,
Even some YouTube links.
even some YouTube links. So we are going to try to sift through all of it and help you understand it.
Yeah, and it's not just about understanding what they believe, though. Like, that's the easy part.
Yeah.
The real challenge, and what makes this deep dive so interesting, is figuring out why people believe it.
All right. So get ready to have your mind bent a little bit because we're going to be looking at everything from the ancient origins of this theory to its modern day resurgence and even touch on some celebrity flat earthers along the way.
Ooh, yeah, and you might be surprised to learn that there's no single, like, unified flat Earth model.
Oh, really?
Yeah, there's actually quite a bit of variation within the community.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so before we get too deep into the why, let's start with the what. Paint me a picture. What does the flat Earth actually look like, according to, the general theory?
Okay, well, imagine, like, a giant flat disk, kind of like a pizza, but on a planetary scale. And that's the Earth in their model.
A pizza Earth. Okay, I'm intrigued,
Yeah.
but I have so many questions already.
I bet you do.
Like, what about gravity? What's on the underside?
Okay, hold on. Let's stick with the surface for now.
Okay.
Around the edge of this pizza, Earth is like a massive wall of ice, what they believe Antarctica to be. And all of this is enclosed by a dome they call the firmament, like a giant snow globe.
So we're all living under a giant cosmic dome.
That's the gist of it.
Wow.
And within this dome, the sun and moon are like way smaller than scientists claim, and they act kind of like spotlights moving across the sky.
Okay.
But like I said, there's disagreement even within the flat Earth community
Oh, I see.
on details like how exactly the sun and the moon move and what they're made of.
Yeah, that's kind of what I find fascinating about this. It's not just one concrete idea.
Right.
It's a whole collection of beliefs all centered around like this rejection of a spherical Earth.
Yeah,
It's like they're more united by what they don't believe than what they do.
exactly. And that actually tells us a lot about conspiracy theories in general. It's often more about rejecting the mainstream narrative than subscribing to like a single alternative explanation.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so we've got our pizza Earth under a dome, spotlights for the sun and moon. It's a wild picture for sure. But we have to address the elephant in the room, or rather like the mountain of scientific evidence that says, nope, Earth is definitely a sphere.
Right. And one of the most compelling pieces of evidence, it comes from something we use every day, GPS.
Oh, yeah, good point.
Like if the Earth were flat, our GPS systems, which rely on, a network of satellites orbiting a spherical Earth,
Right.
simply wouldn't work.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I use GPS all the time. It's practically magic.
Right.
And you're saying that magic only works because the Earth is round.
Exactly. The calculations used by GPS to pinpoint your location are based on the principles of a spherical Earth and the curvature of space-time.
Right.
A flat Earth model simply wouldn't allow for the precise positioning that we rely on every day.
Okay, so that's 1 point for Team Sphere.
1 point for Team Sphere.
What else do we have in our arsenal of evidence?
Well, let's talk about the horizon. We all know that as a ship sails away from the shore, it gradually disappears hull first, as if it's sinking below the curve of the Earth, right?
Right.
Flat Earthers try to explain this away with perspective and atmospheric distortion, but there's a simple way to prove them wrong.
Oh, do tell.
Think about mountains.
Okay.
If the Earth were flat, we should be able to see like the entire mountain range from a distance, regardless of how far away it is.
Right.
But that's not what we observe.
Yeah. No, you're right. You can see the peaks of mountains long before you can see the base.
Yeah,
It's like they're slowly rising up from behind the curve of the Earth as you get closer.
exactly. And that observation, it just can't be explained by perspective alone. It's direct evidence of the Earth's curvature.
Yeah, so ships disappearing hull first, mountains rising from behind the curve. These are all things that we can actually observe ourselves, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And these observations directly contradict the claims of a flat Earth. But but this is just the tip of the iceberg. There's a whole glacier of scientific evidence out there, and we'll explore more of it as we continue our deep dive.
I like that glacier of evidence.
Yeah,
I'm ready to dive deeper into this.
let's do it.
But before we do, let's take a step back and acknowledge that despite all this evidence, people still cling to the flat Earth idea.
It's true.
And that's the part that really intrigues me, like the why.
Yeah.
What makes someone reject all this science and embrace a theory that seems, well, so out there?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it's one that we'll be tackling head on in the next part of our deep dive.
Oh, okay.
We'll be looking at the history of this belief, the psychology behind it, and maybe even get a glimpse into the minds of some famous flat earthers.
Ooh, celebrity flat earthers? That's a story for another time. But for now, let's leave our listeners with this thought. If you're standing on a beach watching a ship sail away, take a moment to really observe what's happening. Think about the mountains in the distance. What do these observations tell you about the shape of our world? Stay tuned for part 2, where we'll really get into the why behind this fascinating and perplexing theory.
Looking forward to it.
All right.
All right.
Welcome back to the deep dive. We're picking up right where we left off, exploring flat Earth theory, and now that we've laid out the basic model and looked at some pretty solid evidence for a spherical Earth, let's get into the really mind-boggling part. Why do people believe this?
Yeah, because as we've seen, it's not just about scientific literacy.
Right.
There are deeper forces at play here.
Okay, so let's delve into those deeper forces. Where do we even begin?
Well, one way to understand this whole phenomenon, I think, is to kind of trace its roots.
Okay.
The idea of a flat Earth isn't actually new.
Right.
It's been around for centuries.
Oh, really? I thought this was like a relatively modern idea,
Yeah.
kind of fueled by, internet conspiracy theories and all that.
You'd be surprised.
Uh-oh.
Many ancient civilizations before, like the advent of modern astronomy, believed in a geocentric model of the universe, meaning they thought the Earth was the center of everything and often envisioned it as flat.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean, without telescopes or satellites, it's easy to see how people might have come to that conclusion just based on, what they could observe with their own eyes.
Exactly. But even in ancient times, there were those who kind of challenged the flat Earth idea.
Oh, okay.
The ancient Greeks, for instance, made some pretty astute observations. They noticed things like the curved shadow of the Earth during a lunar eclipse,
Right.
and how ships disappeared hull first over the horizon.
Right.
These observations led them to deduce correctly that the Earth must be a sphere.
So the ancient Greeks were already debunking flat Earth theory way back then.
Pretty much, yeah. And that knowledge continued to develop through the centuries.
All right.
By the Middle Ages, the spherical shape of the Earth was widely accepted in the scientific community,
Okay.
and even incorporated into the works of influential thinkers like Dante.
So if the idea of a spherical Earth has been around for so long, how did this flat Earth theory make a comeback?
Well, it's interesting. The resurgence of flat Earth beliefs kind of happened in the 19th century,
Right.
alongside this period of rapid scientific and technological advancement.
That seems kind of counterintuitive. You'd think more scientific discoveries would lead people away from these beliefs.
You think so, right?
Yeah.
But it was actually a reaction against these advancements. There was this growing distrust of authority and institutions,
Right.
and some people found it really difficult to reconcile these kind of new scientific ideas with their existing worldview.
I guess rapid change can be unsettling, and for some people, clinging to familiar beliefs might feel more comforting.
Yeah, that's one way to look at it.
Yeah.
And this sentiment was further fueled by figures like Samuel Rowbotham. He was a 19th century English writer who published a pamphlet called Zetetic Astronomy, which laid out the foundations of modern flat Earth theory.
So this wasn't just some random idea that popped up.
Right.
It had a specific origin and a figurehead promoting it.
Exactly. And Rowbotham's ideas, despite being easily debunked by scientific evidence,
Right.
gained a following. He was a really charismatic speaker and presented his ideas in a way that appealed to those who already harbored distrust of, mainstream science and institutions.
It's fascinating how a single person can have such a significant impact on, shaping a belief system.
Yeah.
Even one that goes against, established scientific knowledge.
Yeah, it speaks to the power of persuasion, I think.
Yeah.
And the human need to kind of find explanations that resonate with us, even if those explanations aren't necessarily rooted in, fact.
Right, okay, so we've got this historical context, ancient origins, 19th century revival. But what about today?
Right.
Why is flat Earth theory experiencing a resurgence in the age of the internet?
Well, the internet has been both a blessing and a curse, I think, when it comes to information.
Right.
On the one hand, it's like democratized access to knowledge.
Right.
You can find information on virtually any topic with a few clicks.
Right.
But on the other hand, it's also created these kind of echo chambers and filter bubbles
Yeah.
where people are only exposed to information that confirms their existing beliefs.
Right, regardless of its accuracy.
Regardless of its accuracy.
Yeah, it's like this self-perpetuating cycle.
Totally.
You have a predisposition to believe something.
Yeah.
You go online, you find communities that reinforce that belief,
Right.
and suddenly you're even more convinced even if the evidence says otherwise.
Exactly. And this is where the psychological factors we talked about earlier, like, really come into play.
Okay, so let's unpack those psychological factors. You mentioned distrust of authority. How does that contribute to flat Earth beliefs?
Well, think about it.
Yeah.
If you fundamentally distrust institutions,
Right.
like government agencies, scientific organizations, the media,
Yeah.
you're less likely to accept information coming from those sources.
Even if that information is based on years of research and evidence.
Even then, yeah.
Wow.
For someone with deep-seated distrust, any information coming from these kind of perceived authority figures is suspect.
Right.
They're more likely to believe alternative narratives, even if those narratives, like, lack evidence or rely on flawed logic.
It's almost like they're looking for reasons to distrust the mainstream narrative,
Yeah.
even if those reasons aren't particularly sound.
That's a good way to put it. And this distrust can stem from, like, various sources. It could be personal experiences with, perceived corruption or incompetence, a sense of alienation from mainstream society,
Okay.
or even just a general feeling that, the system is rigged against them.
So it's not just about the information itself.
Right.
It's about the source of that information
Yeah.
and how much trust the individual places in that source.
Precisely. And for those who are predisposed to distrust authority,
Right.
the flat Earth theory can be incredibly appealing. It taps into that skepticism and presents itself as this kind of hidden truth that those in power are trying to suppress.
Yeah, it's like they feel like they're in the know,
Totally.
that they've like uncovered some grand conspiracy that everyone else is oblivious to.
Exactly. And that feeling of being part of a select group,
Right.
of having access to knowledge that others don't, that can be very empowering.
Yeah.
It can give them a sense of purpose and belonging, which is something we all crave as humans.
Right. So it's not just about being right or wrong.
Right.
It's about feeling like you're part of something bigger.
Totally.
Feeling meaningful.
Absolutely. And that sense of belonging can be, like, incredibly strong, especially in a world that can feel increasingly isolating and fragmented.
Okay. So we've got distrust of authority.
Yep.
The allure of kind of hidden knowledge.
Yes.
The need for belonging. Are there any other psychological factors that contribute to flat Earth beliefs?
Yeah, there's one more that's particularly relevant here, the Dunning-Kruger effect.
Oh, right. I've heard of that.
Yeah.
Remind me what it is again.
So it's a cognitive bias where people with limited knowledge in a particular area tend to overestimate their own expertise.
So basically, they think they know more than they actually do.
Exactly. And this can be, like, especially pronounced in complex fields like science.
Right.
Someone with, just a superficial understanding of physics or astronomy might be more likely to dismiss kind of expert consensus because they believe they've figured it all out on their own.
And this applies to flat Earth beliefs. How?
Well, we've seen this play out time and again in online debates and forums. Flat earthers often present arguments that, to someone with a basic understanding of science, seem completely illogical
Right.
or easily debunked.
Right.
But because they lack, a deeper understanding of the subject matter,
Okay.
they're convinced that they've made some groundbreaking discovery that the rest of the scientific community has somehow missed.
And that overconfidence can make it incredibly difficult to even have like a productive conversation.
It can, yeah.
They're so sure of themselves that they're less likely to listen to opposing viewpoints or consider that they might be wrong.
Exactly. And this is where things can get, frustrating for those trying to engage in, like, a good faith debate. It's like
Yeah.
talking to a brick wall sometimes.
So it's not that they're intentionally being stubborn
Right.
or irrational.
Yeah.
It's that they genuinely believe they've stumbled upon some hidden truth
Yeah.
and they're fiercely protective of that belief.
It's a complex interplay of cognitive biases, psychological needs, and societal influences. And that's what makes this topic, so fascinating to study.
Yeah.
It's not just about debunking a theory, it's about understanding the human mind and how we form our beliefs.
It's like a window into how we process information, how we make sense of the world, and how we find our place in it.
Exactly. And it reminds us that even seemingly outlandish beliefs can be deeply meaningful to the people who hold them.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here.
We have.
We've explored the historical roots of flat Earth theory,
Yep.
the role of the internet and its resurgence, and the psychological factors that contribute to its appeal.
Yes.
But you know what I'm wondering?
What's that?
What about the people who are genuinely trying to convince others that the Earth is flat? Are they all just victims of these cognitive biases?
Right.
Or is there something more cynical at play?
Yeah.
What's in it for them?
That's a great question, and it's one that we'll be exploring in the final part of our deep dive.
Okay.
We'll be looking at the motivations of those who actively promote flat Earth theory, the potential for exploitation, and the broader implications of this belief system in a world kind of grappling with misinformation and distrust.
Ooh. I'm getting chills already. This is where things get really interesting. Stay tuned, listeners, because we're about to go even deeper down this rabbit hole. Okay, welcome back to the show. We are ready to wrap up our deep dive into flat Earth theory. And I'm really curious about this final piece. Like, why are some people so active in trying to spread this idea?
Yeah, it's one thing to have a belief yourself. That's a whole other level to try and convince everyone else.
Right. It's like, what's the motivation there? Are we talking about, a bunch of trolls who just want to watch the world burn, or is there something more calculated going on?
I think it's probably a mix of things, and it varies from person to person.
Okay.
Some people might genuinely believe that they're doing the world a service by spreading this, quote unquote truth, however misguided it might be.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. I guess it's like those folks who fall victim to like multi-level marketing schemes,
Yeah.
They're so convinced of the product or the idea that they feel compelled to share it with everyone, even if it means like alienating friends and family.
Yeah, that's a good analogy.
Yeah.
There's a certain level of like zeal and conviction that can be very powerful.
Right.
Especially when it's kind of coupled with that sense of belonging to a community.
Right. That whole us versus them mentality.
Exactly.
Yeah. That we talked about.
But then there's the other side of the coin, the folks who are in it for personal gain.
Oh.
And that's where things get a little murky.
So you're saying there are people who are actually profiting from flat Earth theory.
Oh, yeah.
How does that even work?
Well, think about it.
Okay.
There's a whole flat Earth economy out there.
Right.
Books, documentaries, merchandise, conferences.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have like the YouTube personalities, the social media influencers who are building entire brands around this belief.
Yeah, I guess if you can gather enough followers, you can monetize just about anything these days.
Exactly. And that raises some ethical concerns.
Fa-
Are these individuals exploiting a vulnerable audience for their own financial gain?
Hmm.
Are they preying on people's kind of insecurities and distrust of authority?
It's like those televangelists,
Yeah. Right.
who convince people to donate their life savings in exchange for promises of salvation or miracles or whatever.
Yeah, it's a similar dynamic. You have this like charismatic figure promising access to, hidden knowledge, a sense of community, even a path to enlightenment, but all for a price.
And that price can be pretty steep,
It can be.
both financially and emotionally.
Okay.
I mean, imagine the toll it takes on relationships when you're so deeply entrenched in this belief that you can't even have a rational conversation with your loved ones.
Yeah, that's a real concern, and it's something to kind of keep in mind when we think about the impact of flat Earth theory.
Right.
It's not just a harmless fringe belief.
Right.
It has the potential to cause real harm, both individually and societally.
So what can we do about it?
Right.
Like, how do we combat this spread of misinformation and protect those who might be susceptible to it?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
There's no easy answer, no silver bullet.
Right.
But I think it starts with like education, critical thinking skills, and media literacy.
You mean teaching people how to evaluate information, to question their sources, be aware of their own biases?
Exactly. We need to like equip people with the tools to navigate this, increasingly complex information landscape, to discern fact from fiction, and to be kind of critical consumers of content.
That makes sense, but it feels like an uphill battle, especially in an age where misinformation spreads like wildfire on social media.
It is, and it requires a multi-pronged approach.
Yeah.
We need to, you know, hold social media platforms accountable for the content they allow to spread, support fact-checking initiatives, and empower individuals to be more discerning consumers of information.
And maybe, just maybe, by understanding the motivations behind the Flat Earth movement, we can start to develop more effective strategies for countering it.
Yeah, it's about understanding the kind of the human element, the psychological needs and vulnerabilities that make people, susceptible to these beliefs.
Right.
And if we can address those underlying factors, perhaps we can, start to bridge the divide and build a more informed and critical thinking society.
Wow, this has been a truly mind-bending deep dive.
It has.
We started with a seemingly silly idea of flat Earth and ended up exploring some pretty profound questions about belief, truth, and the very nature of knowledge itself.
It just goes to show that even like the most outlandish ideas can offer valuable insights into the human condition.
Absolutely. So to our listener, thank you for taking this journey with us. Hopefully you're walking away with a deeper understanding of flat Earth theory, not just the claims themselves, but the why behind it all.
And maybe, this deep dive has sparked some curiosity about your own beliefs, the information you consume, and the sources you trust. That's the real power of critical thinking. It's an ongoing process of questioning, exploring, and refining our understanding of the world around us.
Absolutely. We'll leave you with that thought. Keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep diving deep. Until next time.